And we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our very first ever Modern Witch Book Club. I'm super excited. I've got my awesome husband partner, Matt Auryn, with me, who's doing the book club with me. You came up with the awesome questions, the guide that people have been following, and it came in all really handy. So thank you for doing that, because people were like, hey, this helps put things in context. So you are the man for that, sir. Of course, joining us is Jason Miller. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so flattered to be your first guest in what I'm sure is going to be another successful venture for you all.
I'm really excited. And people voted. So we threw a vote, and it was all of the kind of the new releases that had been people who had been nominated, and then some for the Witchcraft and Occult Media Awards. And so it was actually like a boatload of people. Like we had almost 1,000 votes come in, which was pretty cool. So you rose up to the top by one vote, sir, by one vote. And it was really cool. So now we're gonna have to okay, I think we know what books we're gonna have to read.
Who did I beat by one vote?
I think it was Morpheus Ravenna,
Okay, yeah.
who wrote this really thick. My thing was, oh God, February is so short, and that's a real thick book. So I wiped the sweat off my brow when.
But this is a long February. We have a whole extra day.
Well, one might say it's a whole year today. Today is a whole year in and of itself. Yeah. So it was definitely like, oh crap. But people talked about that book so well that now we have to go back and we're going to read it. But we're here to talk about Real Sorcery. And if you're in the book club and you are in the Modern Witch official Facebook group, you can go ahead and start asking your questions in the group now. Just make sure that you turn on permissions so we can see who you are. And we'll start bringing questions up if you have them. If not, Matt and I will just grill Jason about things that we found interesting and poke at things either way. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here, everybody, including Jason. So Jason, let's talk about this, because this is kind of a surprise in the sense that this isn't exactly new material, right? Like, not necessarily. In fact, this is material that I think I read when I first started doing like public teaching and taking on people one-on-one. I had somebody come to me and said, oh, do you know who Jason Miller is? I said, I have no clue who that is. And they're like, hey, you should read this book, because he's talking about some of the things that you're talking about. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I went on this hunt, and I found your work, but it was kind of like I stumbled on this little hidden treasure in occult writing, and not a lot of people had access to it. You had to go looking for it. It was this treasure, and all of the people who were like serious occultists, like all of us, were collecting your books and doing this snobby thing, and you were that, and now you have access to publishing and distribution in a different way, which is super exciting. So what was it like taking this material that has the impact, and it has kind of this legacy that it does, and then bringing it to us in this new way? What was that like for you?
It was like, so you have to imagine if like an old teacher tracks you down from middle school and hands you a term paper and says, I'd like you to update this. It was very much sort of like I had a hard time. I would have rather written a whole new book than add 5,000 words to the old books. It was kind of funny. I had a real hard time doing it because on the one hand, both this and Protection and Reversal Magic, and I updated them both at basically the same time. They both, they reached a lot of people and they touched a lot of people, and whatever their flaws or however different my thinking is now, obviously that spoke to people then.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to go in and just change it. But at the same time, I had an opportunity to update it. So I decided to, rather than mess with the text, other than a couple cases, just to add on, like throw a little, okay, that was then, this is now. So basically, you get me arguing with myself. You get 2023 Jason arguing with 2012 Jason, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Or 2009 Jason. Yeah.
That's like
yeah.
Starhawk Spiral Dance. If you read it, like the 20th year anniversary, she has all these like, because every edition has its update, and there's points where she's like, can you believe like we were running around calling ourselves elders in our 20s here, like, stuff like that.
Yeah. I can share the sentiment.
Yeah, and in our the video we did right before we jumped into doing this book for this book club, one of the things I brought up is like I can't even imagine what your process was like revisiting it, because for me, like within 1 year, a lot of my ideas and beliefs and stuff of my own practice shift so much. So when was the Sorcerer's Secrets originally released?
So the Sorcerer's Secrets was originally released in 2009, right around the time. So I handed in the manuscript the week before my kids were born.
Oh, wow.
And I handed it into New Page then. And I said to them, I said, listen, my kids are going to be born in like a couple days. I'm not going to have, like, I'll obviously go in and look at your editing and but I'm not going to have a ton of time to go through and nurse it. So please just have the editing team give some extra proofreading. And then there was also at that same time a shakeup in the editing department at New Page. So it did not get that. It got the opposite of that. So even friends of mine were like, Jason, why are you talking about the Tree of Like? And I'm like, well, we had this thing to get out and life happened. So they did go back and clean it up in the second edition. And then now we have Real Sorcery, which, is a better title and truer to what it's about. Devin's back, but
we can't hear you.
Damn it. This is the curse of live streaming for me, is like I'm always muting myself and then forgetting to turn it back on. I guess it's supposed to be like an elder millennial issue with live streaming, and I'm just proving everyone right. So, I'm sorry. I'm messing with the screen trying to get everyone on it, and I'm sorry. Okay, so can I ask you before we like dive into the minutia, because I'm hearing you guys talk, and one of the things that just keeps coming to my mind is like, if I was in your shoes and I was presented with this book report, right? And you have to kind of redo it. Did like the meaning of it change for you? Like, I mean, and because things evolve. Like I think about like the Witch's Book of Power that came out in 2016. And I think about here I am now and just the things I've experienced and how I would love to expand things, but to me that definition, like what I was working with then is almost would pale in comparison if I were to sit down and write that book today. And I love that book and I think it's a great book and I don't have any regrets, but I know that like the Devin I am today versus then would write a different book. So did the meaning of it change for you in any way, shape, or form, or evolve for you?
So, like I said, I tried to keep the chapters with the integrity that they had, even things that made me go like, oh God, I'll take the opportunity and after the chapter to go, oh my God. But in the end, not really. The essence of it, I think, was the same. It was supposed to be sort of a field guide to get people started in sorcery, to give them basically some brief tools to boost up their powers, not just things that they know, but things that they are and things that they can do. And then moving into the classic topics of sorceress influence, money and love and health and so on and so forth, and show how sorcery and how magic and mundane things need to kind of operate off one another, right? You've got like the dumb way, which is people just doing magic and then waiting for it to happen. And then you've got like the slightly smarter way where I think Louis Martinet once said, well, first comes the working and then comes the work. So like you do a spell and then you follow it up with all the work, which is good. But what the Sorcerer's Secrets was trying to say is like, we shouldn't really make this differentiation between magic and mundane. And in fact, we should let the magic sort of open up the opportunities for the mundane, and then let those mundane opportunities and openings and chance encounters open up new pathways for magic. So and to continue on, so that these things sort of interweave and become inseparable from one another. And that's where the title of Real Sorcery is much better than the Sorcerer's Secrets, because there really aren't any secrets. There's no like, super secret thing that is closely guarded. That's never been my shtick. But real, like getting real about these things and how they work in real life, not how the book says they work, not what and I don't care how old it is, not how the grimoire says it's going to work, how this really plays out in life. And my life got a lot better when I started to get more real about how magic works. So Real Sorcery was a good title, and I was happy to be able to update it. And for as much as I really like walked into the project kind of going like, oh, this is like homework, it's terrible. Now I kind of want to update Financial Sorcery. So hopefully I'll get the chance to do that, because Lord knows we're in a different financial world.
That's for absolutely sure. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask?
No, okay. I'm still like, I can't even imagine that task of like going back and revisiting, because like there's already stuff in Psychic Witch that I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back and like clarify or change this little thing, but until you're given the chance to actually do it, like it's got to be what it is.
And some things it would be a shame. There are some things, books that I read coming up that I think nowadays might even be thought of as silly books. But before the internet, like we just had the books you had at the bookstore. So silly books might be all you have, right? I've always said that the problem of this generation is different than the problem of our generation, which was we couldn't find signal at all. Right. Like we had to really just treasure whatever. If you got Helping Yourself with White Witchcraft by Al Manning, as bad of a book as it is, you're going to make that work. And whereas now it's separating signal from noise. Somebody has a problem and they go online and they are just bombarded with information, and they can't tell good from bad. I think it's a worse problem, actually.
It's totally. Ooh, that in and of itself is like a whole thing, because one of the things I've been talking a lot about with my close friends, but also with a couple of people online is this. I ran into a video from a Christian minister of all people, and she was up talking about how you can't really tell fake from real anymore, especially in the spiritual world. And her example was that she was standing next to this really pretty fake plant, and it was gorgeous, and you really could not tell it was fake until you got super close and you touched it. And so everything looked gorgeous. It looked healthy. It looked like it was exactly what it needed to be, but it wasn't real. There was nothing. It was not a product of labor and growth, right?
Yep.
And that has stuck with me. That has really, really stuck with me. And I think more than anything, what I appreciate about this book and all of your other books is that you take this approach that magic is real, that sorcery is real, that things are capable. And you don't make excuses for it. You don't make excuses for the ifs, ands, or the buts. You say, I understand it's hard, right? But like, I get it's hard. Like, if that's like a common feeling, I when I'm reading your stuff, I feel like you're sympathizing with us as the reader, but you're religiously saying it's real.
Yeah.
And so much, and you do such a good job at proving it, that when I find myself like stuck in a loop in my practice, I just go to a Jason Miller book and I crack it open. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. I'm serious. Ask Matt.
Yeah.
And I'll find something that's just like, oh, Jason is looking at this thing like this. And that gave me this idea. And it's just about seeing magic in action and practical ways, in real ways that bring fruit to the work that we do, written about and explored by somebody who has that mind of how do we dissect this and make it make sense for other people.
Yeah.
And I find that really inspiring.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.
I'm just saying.
So yeah, I would hate it if all the old books that I thought were silly, like, got redone and their authors were like, oh no, this is,
right.
I let them add on, but thank you so much. That really, if I was trying to do anything, I was trying to do that. So
success, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so let's dive in. So you make a statement in this book, starting it out, and this is the original introduction, and it's just very bold. I am a professional sorcerer, and this is something that takes balls. I know, because I've stood up and said I'm a professional witch for like 20 years now, and it's weird. It's sometimes it's really cool, and sometimes it's really weird. But you also, like, you gave me context about the way that I approach magic to say, actually, I'm a sorcerer too, right? And that's great. And I think you gave a lot of people terminology to use, and I think that's it more than anything. I don't want to oversimplify the book, right? Or oversimplify the message, but I think more than anything, you gave us this definition that we were really craving after there was a widening of the terminology in general, that happened in the 90s and in the 2000s, early part of the 2000s. Suddenly we have sorcery, and it helps a lot of us kind of anchor ourselves in what it is that we're trying to do. So I want to start off just the discussion with asking you the simple question. When you say, I am a professional sorcerer, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that actually mean?
Well, when I wrote that, I was doing magic for clients for money. I don't do clients anymore. I don't do any client work. I stopped individuals, and then eventually I stopped corporate clients, just so I could teach full time. And, but yeah, being a professional sorcerer means doing sorcery for money. So I guess I should have started the new with, like, I'm no longer a professional sorcerer. Now I'm a professional teacher. But yeah, I was. And it was, in 2009, it was still a radical idea in sort of Western pagan ceremonial magicville. Less so in the ATRs, and less so in Asian countries and Arabic countries where professional magicians just abound. But yeah, it was I caught some flack for doing it for money, for teaching for money. and just saying, no, if this is a real thing and we're going to treat it like other real things, and we're going to place the value on it that society places on things. Because, you know, a woman named Anne Duckworth really taught me the value of placing a monetary value on teachings, which sounds terrible, right? It just sounds horrible for me to say that. But I was teaching a free meditation class in Philadelphia when I lived in Philadelphia. And people would come and people would go. We'd have 3 people in one class. We'd have 8 in the next class. But it's always different people, right? People come and go. And it was supposed to be just 6 weeks of like, we do this and then we do this. And each lesson builds on the last. We couldn't do that. So Anne ran a store called the Hand of Aries right off South Street, which is like was the hip area in Philadelphia. And she said, come down to the shop. We're going to charge for the class. Do it right. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. So I show up. There's a full studio of people. I don't have any books or anything at this point. This is still the 90s. But, you know, it's a full class, and everyone stayed for all 6 weeks. And you know, did the work and came back with questions based upon the meditations that they did. And it was because they put money in. They put something that they value and that society values. We can all say that, well, we're beyond society. We don't value the same things and blah, 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 blah. But whether we want to or not, this is the world we live in.
100%.
Yeah, I identify with that so much. Not being like a former professional sorcerer, but like nowadays I'll often say I'm a former professional psychic or a retired psychic because I wanted to focus on writing and teaching.
Right.
And before I retired, one of the things I noticed was when I did raise my prices up, the caliber of people taking it seriously definitely shifted. You know, while I would still do free readings for people, you know, that needed them, I definitely found, you know, people listening when I was reading as opposed to just ignoring it or just coming back for the same reading for like, you know, $25 each time.
Yeah.
So yeah, there definitely is something where like when you put a monetary value on it, people take it more seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so as we start to dive into the book, part 1, chapter 1, the gift. So I loved this chapter for a lot of reasons. One of which is that you and I had a really trippy conversation on a podcast episode. I did a Nephilim special, and you were one of the people I interviewed about the Nephilim and the witch power and all of the fun things. And it was such a good interview. Like the thing, so I got some really good sound bites from you. One of those was that, you know, because we were talking about the origins of like the witch power, and you're like, well, if this is real, it would have to come from some surprisingly small places, and you know, it would be well distributed by now. And that's absolutely true, and I love that. So because we've got this notion that, you know, people who have the ability to practice magic are rare. That there's something that is just super special about you and me that nobody else can do. And I think everyone here is just kind of giggling on the inside, because I think more than anything, when we actually talk about these things, we're trying to say the opposite. Yeah. We're just trying to say that this is a thing that we can all do, right? So when we think about the gift, I get in trouble in the Witch's Book of Power for this, because they didn't clearly define things, and I think that some Nazi whistleblower, you know, types would point to things that I was using in occult literature to help reference what my particular argument was, and I'm sure just you had to have had something along those lines happen when you talk about the gift, because people come into this conversation with a lot of preconceived notions.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to dispel? Is there anything that you'd like to address when it comes to this idea of the gift after having that conversation with people all these years?
I would say the number one thing is to not worry about whether you're gifted or not. Worry about doing the work. When you're doing the work, you're going to find that you're gifted in some ways and not as gifted in others. And then you have a choice to make. Do you work on the things that you're not particularly gifted at to get them up to snuff, even if you can only ever get them up to bare minimum, like barely capable? Or do you focus on the strengths so that you can excel? And that's a choice everyone has to make, and it depends on where the weaknesses are. And this is true in any discipline, really. But the work and the persistence is key. The world is full of talented people who don't put in work and don't have persistence. And often they'll even say they want to be paid for their ideas and their talent and everything else. Is like, no, you have to actually do something with it. And when people put the work in, they get a result. Mm-hmm. It's not always the result they want. We always have, for instance, in the Sorcery of Hecate program, there are always people who are really hung up on the visuals. They want to see Hecate, and that's all they want. And I'm like, that's not even the point of the course. Like, I could give two. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah, go for it.
I could give two shits whether you ever have a vision of Hecate or not. It's utterly, good for you. Otherwise, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I'm more interested in how it's impacting your life, what you're doing with it. And there are some people who they almost never have a vision. Or the visions and messages they get, they doubt instantly. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, oh, well, maybe this is a fantasy. And it's like riding a bike. You're like, oh, maybe my dad's not hanging onto the bike anymore. Oh, he's not. And then you fall. Mm-hmm. It's like, over your astral projecting. It's like, oh, I'm out there, but can I still feel my body? Like, well, now you're back in your body. Because of course you can still feel your body. You're still alive. You can't feel your body. You got a bigger problem. But so it's people, if you do the work and you apply it, maybe you won't have the vision that you want to have. But if you can do things with the magic, if you can set something to make your life or the life of a loved one better, or make a change in your community with magic, that's a lot better, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And the world is full of people who constantly report the visions that they're having and the messages and the gods that show up and tell them amazing things that really have nothing actionable or meaningful in it, other than like, you're awesome. Right. But there's no execution of spell work there. There's no change in life based on those. Whereas I know a ton of people who are not prone to visions, have real trouble seeing spirits, but man, can they conjure? Like, mm-hmm. Can they whip out a spell and have something happen? There's a great story from Milarepa, the Tibetan yogi, who could do, amazing wizardly things. And all of his students were bothering him to tell them who he was the reincarnation of, who he's the tulku of, they call it. Your reincarnate lama is a tulku. Who are you the reincarnation of? And he kept saying, it doesn't matter. Nobody important. Like, nobody you've ever heard of. But you must be. You're so enlightened. And he's like, every tantra says you can attain enlightenment in this lifetime if you put in the work. Why don't you believe it?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a lack of faith, which I'm not terribly concerned about, but Milarepa was. It's actually a lack of faith to say if you've attained, you must be someone special. It's a lack of faith in what you're doing, really. So to me, the work is everything. I'll take persistence over being the seventh son of a seventh son, born with a call, receiving the 28th degree of, you know, the Adeptus Ineptus, whatever. I'll take somebody who just works something consistently and persistently.
Well, and that's, you know, that's one of the many reasons I love your work, and I love this new title, because I tend to not be super judgy with people's like practices or whatever, but a lot of times I'll find like experts or teachers or just very strongly opinionated people, and just observing the way they talk about things, I'm constantly asking myself, like, do they actually believe magic's real? Like, because it seems kind of more like an intellectual fandom or something. And I just, like, you know, you can argue about minutia and like I don't know, there's just certain things where I'm even like, I don't see the magic in your life playing out, not you specifically, but like these hypothetical people. And one of the things I love about you and your work is you can see it. You can see the proof is in the tasting of the pudding. Like, you can look at Jason Miller and be like, he's got magic at work and it's working for him.
I think something that's really interesting as we're kind of gliding through the topic is that because you also, like, you went and you had some Eastern study time on your own, you had time to kind of crack this thing that I think a lot of us are raised to believe is very, you know, very out there and untouchable and mystical. And it's, you know, I remember growing up and pretty much anything that had to do with the East was like, that was where it was at. You got to, you know, so as an occultist, so many things are inspired by Eastern philosophies and practices, but rarely do they get to scoop really deep into the soup to get the good stuff. They're just getting some of that broth on top and thinking that that's the soup, right? You got to stir it up a little bit. And so you went and you stirred it up and you got a good taste. And that gives you just a different set of tools to function from. So that when we are looking at these things, like you know, me as somebody who is an occult practitioner, and I believe I have this ability, there's this need to nurture it. And sometimes we want to make that process so out there and so complicated. And, you know, like, we're looking at the East and saying, oh, if I could meditate like that, then I would have this blah, blah, blah. And it's not necessarily about that stuff. And when we get to have somebody like you with the tools that you have to approach the topic, it really helps, I think, demystify the mystifying among the occult.
Yeah, you know, the folks in the East are just more or less very similar to folks in the West. You know, I use the term Westerner too, so I'm guilty of it, but I really do wish there was a better term, because it's like a bad division. First of all, where is it? Between Turkey and Greece, and what about Africa? What about you know, so it's a problematic kind of division. And then, of course, there's a lot of what came over from the East to the West didn't, in fact, right? And you can tell this really easily. I was talking with a Thelemite, and they were like, you know, oh, well, when Karl Kellner, and he studied with a Sufi and the Tantric, and Gurdjieff studied with these people. And I was like, hold up. Full stop. Tantra, Sufism, you know, all these Eastern paths that they're talking about, they're really into these lineages of and initiations, and you know, you should be able to say who did what to who. I'm like, and then on the Western side, we've got these magical orders that are really well documented. I mean, they're super into, like, you've got the paper stamped and signed by Sabazius. Oh no, mine is from Beta. It's even better, you know? So they're really into it. So you've got these two sides that are like hyper fixated on who initiated who, but somehow like the people that initiated the Westerners are just a tantric, a Sufi, or an order that doesn't actually, like, there's no documentation of whatsoever. So there's a lot of people coming up with their own stuff, looking to some place they think is inscrutable and saying that's where it comes from, right? It's like the entrepreneur's trick. When people sometimes they start out a solo business, they will put like director of something on the card rather than the president and owner, because it makes them seem like they're part of a larger organization. And then they can use it in negotiations to say, well, I have to check with the boss. Meanwhile, you're the boss, the employee, the owner, and, you know, the only person. But so there's a little bullshit there. But, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are differences. And I have met with yogis that live in caves for years on end. I've spent, you know, days meditating in caves. I've been on retreat, not like a weekend retreat at a center, but, you know, I've been on retreat. So there is that, but that's not the whole of it. There's also people that do magic and folk spells and things like this, all over the place. So, you know, it's not all that different when you get down into the nitty gritty of it, and you actually meet the people. And of course, the blessing of this age is that you can go and meet the people. You don't have to take Blavatsky's word about Tibet. You can go meet Tibetans.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the thing too, is that times have changed, right? Things have shifted. And so now access to not just information that would have been considered incredibly exotic, you know, back in the day, not only we have more access to those things, but we have access to the people who come from those places where this stuff was being mined and kind of re-represented after, you know. So I find that all very interesting, and too, because obviously you're an example of that, of somebody who went and because there was a route, and you followed that route and you did the work, and then you came home when you got the calling.
Yeah, that I did. Well, when my visa was up.
Yeah, well, I mean, the calling can come in many different ways, right? I mean, let's be real. Right? The goddess works in mysterious ways. Matt, did you want to add something?
Oh, no. Just kind of on this kind of stream of stuff. I'm revisiting Consorting with Spirits now that I've got the Audible for it. So I'm like, because sometimes you pick different things up hearing it versus reading it. And you succinctly explained something that I kind of was stumbling around with the intro interview that we did introducing this book, which was, I discussed how you're really good at blending things in a way that isn't problematic or ineffective. And the way that you put it in Consorting with Spirits was like using Odin's Furba to invoke Hecate or something, where it's just totally like off base. Yeah. And I think we do see a little bit of that sort of, I want to use the word tantric, but like that, your quote unquote Eastern influence, as well as that folk magic to kind of a ceremonial approach. I guess I'm stumbling around, and I guess this is your whole like concept of the word sorcery.
Yeah. So, when I mean, that division of like folk magic and ceremonial magic, it's not quite the same in Buddhism and Hinduism. There are elements of hedge magic, and you could be at this very complex community ceremony, and you'll find them throwing cakes at at something. Am I still on? I can't see anybody else. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just gave you the floor. That's all.
Okay.
I found there's a button where I can just do that. So
nice.
I just did it. Yeah.
Looking at myself. No, bring yourself back. I don't want to look at myself. That's weird. Now I feel like I'm talking to myself. All right, you're here. Yeah. So, but I got my start that way because I got my start that way before I knew any better. I grew up in Jackson, New Jersey, which is sort of like where rural New Jersey starts, like where the Pine Barrens start. It goes from like, the New York suburbs down into the Barrens. And Six Flags, right, is in Jackson, New Jersey. Great Adventure. I am an alumni, worked there for many years. But so in this little podunk town, while I was in high school, I had a teacher who was a Rosicrucian, and she was instrumental in teaching me my first psychic protection exercises, in helping me sort out good crap from bad crap in books. So, hail Blanche Krugner for all of her help there. But that's also where I met Walter, a man that owned the Globe, which was an African fashion store, but he had a stall in the back that he sold conjure supplies out of. So I got to be friendly with Walter, and I would go in and I'd pick up, wow, what does essence of bendover oil do? Explain. And so these kind of things started to blend in my practice. And then I picked up books like Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft, where he also kind of not blended American hoodoo, obviously, but he had that blend of ceremonial and folk magic together right there in the book. And I just loved it. And then eventually I met John Reynolds, who was my sort of into the world of Tibetan sorcery. All in that little area, and all before I was 21. So there's never been that division for me. But then as I got involved in the community, I started to see this division all around. Well, I'm a ceremonial magician. I've got a giant stick up my ass, and unless it's in a table and, unless I can put it on the tree of life, then I don't deal with it at all. And then you've got people that were mostly on the Wiccan end of things. And it was, I think for many people, it was as much about a religious expression, even more than a magical expression, right? And then, of course, there was like the just sort of eclectic, whatever you think, man, whatever you think is real is real. It doesn't, don't buy High John, just write High John the Conqueror root on a piece of paper, throw it in the bag. Same thing. It's your intention that matters. Yeah. It's just your intention. So I was kind of in the middle, and I was like, well, you can be a ceremonial magician and never do practical magic. You can just talk to angels and climb the Sephira, climb the ladder and then take the slide back down the tree of life and do it again and again. Or you can, you can be a pagan and never do magic as well. You can be a religious pagan, which is fine. Both of these things are fine. But when it came to practical magic, when it came to results-based stuff, I was like, sorcery speaks to me. And of course, there were a couple people, there was the International Guild of Sorcery that was operating at the time with mail order catalogs and stuff. I didn't have much of that, but and then I guess Moloch was doing the sorcery thing before me. So, brother Moloch. But yeah, I was like, sorcery. This is, there's no mistaking. This is about practical magic. It can be about mysticism and spiritual growth as well. But, it's about results. Like if you're not getting a result, that you're not doing sorcery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So Chapter 2. Yeah, we're 44 minutes in and we're on chapter 2.
Oh,
Yeah, that's gonna be a thing.
that's okay. I had some
No,
coffee.
it's fine. I love it, but I'm just saying, gentlemen, we are chatters, and I love it, and it's so easy to talk to you, and you're fun to talk to. But in chapter 2, you are talking about the 3 levels, and this is something that like is talked about ad nauseum, it seems like these days, right? And but it's also one of those things that I never quite feel like people get. So yes, we talk about it ad nauseum, but we're running through it because there's a reason for it. So specifically, the way that you approach it is really in this: how do we take this kind of etheric experience and bring it again into something that's real and tangible, right? And that I loved, because that is different. That it was a different way of looking at this thing that I think a lot of people do tend to struggle with. So when we're talking about these 3 levels, specifically, and you also use one of my favorite words ever, Empyrean or Empyrean is like one of my favorite words in just all of language.
Good word.
So we've got this idea of your 3 levels. Those don't necessarily match up with like what we usually and kind of typically see. And I find that like, okay, it kind of squishes certain things together, it expands other things, and it provides opportunity for there to be a lot of overlay in this really fun way. So when I did this on my own, Matt, you had to do this with one of your books, where we kind of like do that old occult thing where we organize the universe according to vibration, or essentially, right?
Yeah.
When you went to go through this process, was there a concern you had, or was there something that you really wanted to make sure you did approach, or that we understood as the reader? Because again, it's kind of ad nauseum. We see this stuff, you're presenting it in this different way. What was your point of presenting it that way? And I am going to hand the screen over to you because these people came to see you. But for this one, I'm handing it over, sir.
All right. So, I don't even really think in terms of the 3 levels. I think more in terms of the 7 levels. And I put them, I broke it up into 7, I think, in the additional material in the new book. But the idea of the levels, I think a good definition of magic is actually bridging the spiritual to the physical. I think that is just as good as any other definition that I've had, where you are making something that is in the realm of the spiritual manifest into the physical. And so, when it comes to the 3 realms or the 3 levels, which is a traditional breakup, you can see it all over the world, as I pointed out in the chapter. And then I said, just realize that the map is not the terrain. There are other ways to break this up. And like I said, I usually break it up into 7 now when I teach. But I think the number one thing that people, or my thinking is different than others, is that the physical isn't the grossest level and lower, right? I don't think in terms of good, better, best. I don't think in terms of higher and lower. I just think in terms of what's underneath or more subtle, right? So I think in Agrippa, actually, I think like the second sentence in the occult philosophy was really like, hey, there's these 3 levels, and each one supersedes and controls the one underneath it. And I'm like, okay, Henry, gotcha on sentence 1. There's these 3 levels, but I disagree on sentence 2. I don't think that the higher controls the lower and supersedes and all that. And I think that's where the mistake comes in. There's a feedback. The physical affects the etheric and the astral and the symbol space and the mental and the divine just as much as the other way around. This isn't a one-way filter. And it's not so much, for me, there's nowhere to go, right? People have this idea of like, well, I got to get to the astral. Like it's over there. And of course, traditionally, that's what the astral meant, is starry regions. So beyond the moon, it would be the astral. But that's not how we use it now. It's not how we tend to think about it. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. Well, there's things to do to reorient yourself. But I use the term, orient yourself from the physical to the etheric, or from the physical to the spiritual. So people that do a lot of yoga, people that do get a lot of acupuncture treatments, people that do Tai Chi, you'll see these people start to sit with their back straight more just naturally. And they sometimes will tilt their head slightly forward because they're oriented to their etheric body just from practice. They may not even be thinking about it, but they can feel that central channel. And so it feels better when they straighten it out. I was at some amusement parks recently, and both my brother-in-law and I are like, oh, back, and I showed him, like, you just tuck it, tilt your head, and it stretches it out without doing anything. And he's like, oh, that's amazing. But it's not just bones, it's the central channel. Similarly with the astral, you can orient yourself to that. So I always think of people as spirits who are oriented around bodies rather than, oh, those are spirits and we're people. No, we're spirits too. We're oriented around bodies, and those spirits are oriented around other things. Some of them are quite oriented around other physical things as well. And, when we contact them, we're pulling them out of their comfort zone just as much as we're going out of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if you read some, descriptions of classical evocations, one of the things many of the spirits say is like, all right, like, you dragged me here. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it. What do you want so I can go? Because they're oriented to the physical in a way that, makes their back hurt.
Yeah. I love that. I love that story. I'm going to put that in my cauldron of things.
I think of the levels as like, it's a spectrum, and you can divide that up in a number of different ways.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily like linear. I mean, and just everyone, because one of the things that we're going to talk about as we get into things like the HGA, Bonnie has posted a really great question. I can't wait to get to. But as we start talking about these things, it's really easy to think of everything as being stacked on top of each other, because that's the way our little linear human brains want to work. But it's really this kind of omnidirectional, like multi-torial. It's crazy. Everything's in and out, vibrating all at once. It's kind of beautiful.
You also get the people who think that there's one thing that makes magic work, and it's at one of those levels, right? And so when you get the full spectrum magic of like, we've got to get all these things kind of operating in sync, it throws people off. You've got the physical kids, and right. They're like, totally. They want to do arts and crafts. They want to play with the herbs, the plants. They want to burn something and tie something and throw something in a river. Show me the gestures to make and the words to say, right? And then you've got the energy people. And if it's like, for them, like, if they're not going, they're not doing any magic, right? Because, well, that's just empty words. I'm like, no, they're not just empty words. You don't actually need to like do fake Tai Chi to get magic to work. You're not a Jedi. It doesn't work.
Right.
And then there are, the prayerful people, the people for whom magic really is it's all up here. It's in the head. These physical things don't matter. And this energetic thing is just, it's all about either the mind or the spirits or the deity. And so it's all, that upper level. And I'm always like, get all of these working together, and you've got like a hell of a recipe for success.
Something really cool. So speaking of getting everything working together, so we have these kind of different planes, right? And then you've got approaches to accessing those planes, to bringing that energy over, which essentially is what chapter 3 is about. And so I want to just read. I want to quote you, because I thought this was a really powerful statement. And I'm sure if you read this on Kindle, it's highlighted, because if not, it should be. Go do that. But you say, not all. Excuse me. Not all sorcery happens in a temple. A lot of magic can be done in the field, right in your home, place of business, or on the street. Field magic doesn't always require rituals or even words. Some sorcery can be launched while having a conversation or simply looking at someone. To be able to do this effectively, the sorcerer or sorceress must train to be able to cast spells with a simple gesture, a gaze, a series of breaths, or a few words spoken in a special way.
Yeah.
And so, again, we have this idea that there are simple things that we can do to bring all those things into alignment, to almost like a trigger, right? Put these things into motion. So your approach, or in this chapter, you talk about gestures and you talk about breath. And breath, I'm used to seeing to some extent. I like this. You give us cool exercises for breath work, but gestures was something that I'd only usually seen in very ritual kind of settings, and not always does the gesture make sense. When you're doing gestures, and I'm following along in the book, I actually feel like I'm unlocking little channels of energy, and it got me into mudras and stuff. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about establishing a practice of bringing these things in together, if somebody is coming from just kind of an open world background and they're just trying to jump in and develop some skills quickly, what are the breath work exercises that are your go-to, that you recommend people? The other thing I'm looking at, though, I'm just going to be real with you, is people are looking for experiences to kind of prove things to themselves, right? Like magic is real, energy is real. I can feel these things. What in the breathwork world do you feel like helps trigger those things for people?
I kind of stopped doing the prove it's real thing. In fact, I encourage everyone to regularly consider that it's not real. that just as an intellectual exercise, to say, maybe I have just been bullshitting myself for 40 years. But when it comes to breath work, probably the best and easiest thing to start with is just a simple vase breath. Just several times a day, breathe in through the nose and feel the air come up and then down the central channel. Now, I know it's really going into your lungs, but you feel it go deeper. You feel it go down the spine, all the way down past the navel, right? And then when you breathe out, you can either take a nice deep breath out, or you can release it, almost like you're letting air out of a balloon in a very controlled way, like, tss, yeah. So, and you feel that shoot up the central channel. And if you do that multiple times a day, and it's a vase breath, because you're filling your lungs like you're filling a vase with water, right? We don't fill vases from the top down. We fill them from the bottom up. So we're filling the lower chambers of the lungs. We're letting our diaphragm and our belly distend. It's very unattractive. And then we fill up from there. And then when we release in a controlled way from the top and out. And if you do this regularly, it's going to create just a little heat. This isn't like Tumo instructions or anything fierce that's going to cause problems, but it's going to cause enough heat that it sublimates the body somewhat, which literally means making it more subtle. And that's going to help dreams. It's going to help psychic perception. It's going to help a whole bunch of things. There are other exercises you can do that aren't breath based. Some people, maybe you have some breath problems or something. And one of my favorite exercises is really just a mental exercise to do with the mind, where you just relax your eyes and look at whatever's in front of you as if it was a screen, right? We're very used to seeing three-dimensional images on screens. So just imagine that you're looking at a giant screen, that what the room you're in, the country you're in, whatever it is you're looking at, it's not 3D, it's 2D, right? And just spend a moment concentrating on that, calm your breath, reach out with your feelings. They say that in Star Wars all the time, but it's actually a really good piece of advice. When people reach out with their minds, they tend to think a lot. Reach out with your feelings. Feel tactily with your mind. And reach out and try to sense what is on the other side of that 2D screen. And most people receive a response. They get an impression. It may not be the sort of 4K HD, the goddess appears that they were hoping to get, but they feel that spirit space beyond the regular space, because what they're doing is they're taking their three-dimensional perception and they're shrinking it down to 2 dimensions, which then leaves this vacancy in the mind to be filled by what it ordinarily doesn't perceive. So those are 2 exercises that I think are doable by almost anyone, and that, will help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love all this. This is freaking awesome. There's so much to chew on. And we're really getting to the part of the book too, where we start going through so many exercises that like it gets intense. Like you go into like overdrive. It's like you hit the NOS button when we hit when we get to part 2. So in the last chapter of part 1, which is chapter 4, everyone, if you're following along, there's a lot of ground that's covered. Where you talk about building a daily practice and establishing that. And again, this idea of bringing things into the real. As part of that, there's talk about everything from like the bornless rite to there's energy exercises that you can do. Like there's a lot of stuff in there. And everyone who was reading it had a wonderful response to this, because one of the things that we often talk about, especially in that we were talking about in the group, was that it's so hard to keep that daily practice going. And so what I want to ask you essentially is actually, this is coming from Bonnie. I'm going to put your question up. And Bonnie, it's not giving us your whole question. So we're probably just going to be able to get to part of it. But I'm going to try to distill this. And so Bonnie's saying, can you share more about the knowledge and conversation with the HGA? Does connection usually happen as a sudden presence, like a breakthrough, or can it be a gradual presence that comes through over time? And then she goes on to say she's got a connection with her higher self and gets advice, but it doesn't feel, her experience is not the same thing that like ceremonial magicians are reporting back. Bonnie, this is really good. Thank you so much. That's an awesome thing to bring up, because we have this idea of the experience. And we just did a ritual mediumship panel at Convocation last weekend. And the question that got everybody going was, what does it feel like? Like, what is this like from an actual standpoint? What are you experiencing? Because we're not always going to get that. And I think when I have this HGA conversation with people, it's that thing. It's this thing that Bonnie's talking about. It's the, I get something, but I'm not getting that, right? I'm not getting this thing. So to kind of reiterate, how does this happen for you? Is it like a breakthrough, or is this something that is a gradual thing that will build up over time?
So, I would say that the way that Abraham of Worms has it in the book, and then also the way that other people have done it, maybe using Liber Samek, which was Crowley's method, and I started with that and then sort of adopted more of the original version from the papyri. is that, yeah, it does pop in as a sudden thing. Now, I think the important thing to clarify here is that everyone has the HGA. This is not a ritual to get an HGA. It's the ritual that is supposed to give you knowledge and conversation with the HGA. Intimate knowledge and conversation in a very bodily way. So the ritual isn't about summoning a being, and it's not about even contacting or getting messages from a being, because anyone can get messages from their holy guardian angel, from their higher self. Anyone can, which I don't necessarily equate together, but messages like that, that doesn't require the months of focus and sort of all-consuming ardor for this experience and this union, which is really what the whole HGA experience is about. So for me, it happened in a very sudden way. One of those, like, am I dreaming? Is this crazy kind of ways? And it happened 9 months in rather than 6 months. So I was already starting to feel like I had failed. And I would get, I had spiritual experiences along the way. But none of them fit the bill, right? And then a friend of mine had suggested that, hey, this 6 months is what this book says, but that may not be it. It may take longer. And then, of course, we find out that the book in German actually says 18 months. It's not 3 periods of 2 months. It's 3 periods of 6 months. So, but in 9 months, I had this experience because it was ever increasing focus, meditation, and calling for this angel that is your connection to the divine. And it was so matter of fact that the first thing the angel said was, okay, you got to start summoning the demon princes tomorrow. And I was like, I don't really believe in that kind of thing. I don't believe in demons and whatnot. I was in a very thelemic headspace, or thelemically influenced headspace at the time. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't have a ring or anything prepared for that. I wasn't gonna do that part. I just wanted this knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. And the Holy Guardian Angel is like, oh no, dude. Like, now that you have this connection, you have to make that conjuration, because these spirits are going to be attracted to you, and you've got to be able to control them. It's like, it's kind of like if somebody found out that you had Jeff Bezos's cell phone number, people would be like, hey, can you just call and get this, thing taken care of for me? So spirits can be like that. And still in all, I was in a headspace where I was still like, wow, that was really visceral and real. But, I've had visceral and real spiritual experiences before that didn't actually amount to much in the end. So the angel said, I'm going to supply you with a tool that I want you to use to summon the demons tomorrow, right? So I was like, okay, like that's really laying it down. All right. The next night, a friend of mine who had made this for himself comes over, and he gifts me with this. I don't know if you can see the whole thing. It's pretty big, but this giant Egyptian rock,
so cool
staff.
That is so cool.
And I was like, okay, guess angels are real. And, I guess this work led me to the spirit that, was able to give me actionable information. Now, after a time, it sort of fades into the background unless you keep that communication going, just like any other real person, right? And so as that angel kind of helps you and sets you on other paths, in this case, wound up in Nepal, the angel might take a background. But just like friends that you lose touch with for a while, all you really need to do at that point is dial the phone number. You don't need another 9 months or 18 months or, whatever it would take you now. You have that in to that spiritual contact. So that would be my description of the Holy Guardian Angel. That, when people feel that they have a connection to their higher self or to their Holy Guardian Angel, they absolutely do. I would not dispute that at all. But that's not the same thing that people are going on a retreat or spending 9 months of their life trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry, everybody, that I keep shifting the camera around. I keep hitting a button and then things happen, and I'm so sorry.
This
so
is cool. I like this.
You're blowing my mind. I'm listening to this, and I feel like every time I hear you talk about magic, like you're so passionate about what it is that you're talking about that it just lights a fire, I think, and I'm sure everyone's having that type of experience. So when we get into the second part of the book, we get into, like I said, it's a lot of exercises, and there's a lot of like, okay, let's put this stuff into action. Like the first part is the theory, right? Second part's the practice. And the very first thing that you get into is something that I feel like is the number one overlooked part of doing, of having an occult practice, which is the intel gathering, the divination stuff. Like it's usually like, I remember literally every magical teacher I ever had telling me, well, you do a spell and then you do a reading. And it wasn't you do a reading and then you do a spell. It was you do a spell and then you do a reading. And it took me a long time to figure out on my own that if I just flip that around, I get a lot better results. So it became this situation for me where, I'm all about talking about this with people, but rarely do we get the chance to really dive into it. So let me ask you, when we talk about divination and we're talking about creating a daily practice or creating a practice where there's any sort of longevity, how big of a deal is divination for that long-term haul? Because I think this book is, especially when we get into this part, I think it's resonating more with intermediate practitioners or people who've been around for a minute. And we run into that problem where it's like, hey, we lost that thing and we're not feeling it. And so I'm always looking for reasons or things that help us get back into that. And so, again, from that long-term practice, standpoint, how important is divination? How important is this intel gathering? I know what Matt would say.
So this is probably the area where I have departed the most from how I used to think, and probably the most from some of the community at large. Because although I have right behind me here, there's got to be like 150 tarot decks. I've been doing tarot since I was 15 years old. I love it. I'm not sold on the need. I've seen as much harm come from divination as I have help. Let's put it that way. I've seen it be used and misused so many times as a way to escape action, as a way to escape responsibility, as a way to kind of, weasel out of things that I am much more in favor of somebody pulling the trigger on a spell than I am doing a divination before a spell. And I wasn't always like that. I used to kind of, I started with Don Craig, and he was that, do the divination before a spell so you know what's going to happen, if anybody's going to be hurt or something like that. And yeah, I just, I'm sort of in the phase of action is king. Now, what I tell people in that chapter, and what I really strongly believe, is that we should treat divination as a piece of data, right? So intelligence organizations like the CIA and stuff, they differentiate data and intel. Data is a piece of information. It could be signal data, it could be human data, it could be coded data or something like that, or in our case, divination, which is why I said maybe get different types of divination in there, right? Like an omen, some sortilege, an augury, but different active intel, like, so actionable intelligence is made up of data. So I always tell people, like, do the divination and try to get your divinations from as least of a biased source as you can, which is hard to find, in fact. And then throw it up against all the other data that you have. Now, it doesn't mean if this piece of information from your divination doesn't match the rest of your data. In other words, you think things at your job are going one way, and everything about your job is telling you it's going that way, and the divination is like, no, don't do that. I'm not saying disregard the divination, because you have a Thanksgiving turkey situation that the divination is trying to warn you about. But it's also a point where you want to be like, okay, I want to dig deeper. And I think being a professional has, like, I've seen how people handle divination in their lives, and I've gotten pretty upset. Like, once every year or two, I have to explain, no, I didn't curse you. I know somebody told you I did, but I didn't. I don't even know who you are. I'm not mad at you, and if I was, I wouldn't curse you over whatever you think I'm mad at you for. And this happens a lot. I've seen people, other readers, where everyone that comes to them, their mother is cursing them. Everyone, like everyone. I've seen people who they think they're, they've got cross conditions or something, and they'll go to one reader and they'll say, oh, well, it's that Peruvian shaman you saw 3 years ago. He doesn't like you. He gave you these cross conditions. And then they go to another reader, and the reader says, no, it's, this person that's doing it. And then another reader will say, no, it's another source. And rather than thinking maybe one of these or all of these people are wrong, they kind of come around and they're like, oh my God, 3 people are cursing me. So probably more than even magic itself, I tell people, like, be careful with divination. Get good at it. Use it. Sarah Mastros, I just posted on this, and Sarah Mastros says she uses it for brainstorming more than she uses it as like a thumbs up, thumbs down thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's how I use it as well. And So I guess I know a lot of people want me to say divination is extremely important and that's where it needs to start. And if you can't, I think Pete Carroll was like, if 20% of your enchantments come true, then you're a great sorcerer. But if only 20% of your divinations come through, you're terrible. I always like, yeah, and I don't know. I guess I'm more of a get your fingers burnt and make some change than I am and accept the responsibility for that. Because I always come around to, okay, well, I want to do this big thing, and the card said something is going to go wrong. When have you ever done a big thing and nothing went wrong? Right?
Word.
And the cards are kind of there to say, like, if the cards are just like, everything's groovy, man, then, right, they're kind of there to say, actually, there's something you need to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for people to hear that and kind of still step forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I'm anti-divination, but I'm like, it's a piece of data.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I said this on the strategic sorcery list a couple of years ago, and somebody who's a traditional diviner from an ATR was like, no, you're wrong. I did not spend years of my life and take initiations to be told that my divinations are just a piece of data. If I say it's right, then it's, right. To which I say, divination is real, right? Real things don't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Weathermen aren't right all the time. Economists aren't right even half the time. Doctors aren't right all the time. Lawyers aren't right all the time. Other than physical sciences, where it really is like a chemical reaction, and if the conditions are present, it happens the same way each time. Nothing works this way.
Yeah.
But people who want to prove magic is real or feel like they need to defend their magic is real don't want to cop to anything other than like perfection. Like my spells always work. My divinations always are right. And if your divination is always right in the rearview mirror, oh, that's what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
What? Who cares? What what good is that?
Yeah.
That's not helpful. So I'm an unpopular lad when it comes to that kind of thing. I got thrown off of a list once because somebody came on the list and they were like, I'm trying to find my life's purpose. And people were like, you should do a card reading. No, you should get a calorie reading. No, you should do this. And I was kind of like, maybe you should try some different things. Like think about what you're good at and what kind of skills you have, and maybe go out and try new things and do some research and then weave some divination into that and, find your life's purpose by actually like getting involved. And people were furious because I was like, no, I wouldn't base my life's purpose on somebody's card reading.
I completely understand 100%. For me, mostly because when I sit down to do a reading, especially if it's about magic, it's something that is, first of all, it's really personal. Like I would never do a reading for somebody else's magic, because the reality is what we are manifesting and creating. Like I firmly believe that as well. So if my cards or my reading of bones or whatever the hell I'm going at is giving me information, then usually it's part of that strategy, right? It's this idea of, well, this is what things look like now if everything is continually flowing in this direction. But what do you want to manifest, and how are we going to influence things via magic to make those things happen? Which it segues us into the next chapter, which is influence and persuasion. And for me, this was a big one because I find myself alone often in discussing magic in the way that it works as influence. And people want to, because of whatever reason, and it's fine. We all have our own, things. I don't even know, like Matt, you may not agree with me on all of these things either. But I don't necessarily think magic works in the context of I can snap my fingers and something miraculous happens all the time. I think that can happen.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of things have to be in alignment for that stuff to work out. Most of what's going on, I think, is we're pushing and pulling at likelihoods.
Yeah.
And it's really like, I don't want this bad thing to happen. So I'm going to do things to make it very unlikely that thing is going to come into my reality. Or I really would love for these things to be more prevalent. So I'm going to do things to draw those things forward. It is a push and pull. It is all about influence and persuasion. So I often find myself alone in that. And it really bothers me because I think it puts this weird limiting crux on magic, in that it has to be like this experience, this phenomena, this thing. And what that does to me is it just divorce people from the action, from again, bringing things into reality. Right. So what is it about the idea of approaching magic as something that is capable of action through persuasion that for you as a magician makes sense, that it just kind of fits that paradigm, and in a way that you can't avoid it, that you had to bring it up in the way that you did in this book?
Magic as an influence on reality when I started to view it as that, rather than causing change and conformity with will, influencing change, everything just fell into place. Everything with magic just instantly I understood it better. And you're 100% right. Miracle results happen. Paranormal results happen. But they don't happen regularly. We cannot bank on them. Anyone that's sitting around waiting for, the six-figure sum to get deposited into their bank account, or for the demon to bring literal gold bricks, is going to be waiting a long time. So magic is an influence on reality. And I don't know about you guys, but I always get people. Obviously, we all get people who are celebrating their magic working. But then there's somebody who's like, well, I did this and I didn't get what I wanted. Why didn't magic work for me? And people have all kinds of explanations, like some ridiculous bending over backwards explanations, things, you wanted it, but you didn't need it, and your higher self stopped it from happening. It's like, well, where was my higher self when I invested all that money into, Bitcoin? Why doesn't it stop me from doing any other stupid things? And then other people are like, well, it's working on the astral. I'm like, oh God, I don't want to pay my mortgage on the astral. I want to pay it to the bank. If we view it as an influence on minds and events, all of a sudden it all makes sense. And it works how other real things work, right? I can take this screwdriver here and I can flip around my watch, which I took off, or I can flip around a necklace with it easily, pick it up, throw it around. If I go outside and I try to pick up my Toyota and flip it, it's not going to work. It doesn't mean that it's not influence. The pressure is still going into the Toyota. And in fact, if I continue to press, it'll poke through the Toyota. It's not going to move it, but it'll make a hole. And we start to view the world as, oh, well, then we need to think about how much influence versus how much resistance. And we don't always know how much resistance there is. So for instance, there are some state jobs that get posted And legally speaking, they're posted for anyone to apply to. But in reality, they're posted as a formality that they already have a person for that job. But you don't know that, and neither does anybody else other than the hiring manager. In that case, it's very difficult to magic your way into that job, no matter what you do, right? So you might be thinking, well, I'm qualified for this job, and it seems entirely reasonable, and if I'm doing magic, it should get me in there. But is it the right amount of influence? Is it enough influence? And is it aimed at the right thing? Now, maybe if you aimed it at the hiring manager or in it at the company itself in a different way, maybe that person gets the decision taken away from them. But it's not always something that can be swayed, right? So I think one of the best things a magician or a sorcerer or a witch can do is sort of get a feel for what's enchantable and what's not. And one of the interesting things is people grasp this about physical things, right? I think most people who believe in magic kind of have an understanding that they're not going to be able to make it snow in July unless they're in the Arctic or something like that, right? Most people sort of know that is like a crazy effect and would be beyond most magical influence. But when people think about their own internal minds and habits and things, they kind of lose that. So they think, well, I should be able to cast a spell to make my uncle stop drinking. Well, you can cast a spell to influence your uncle to stop drinking, for sure. And if your uncle wants to stop drinking, then that's going to be a help. And if you do some other work to intervene, then that magic is going to have something worthy of its influence. However, just because it's mental doesn't mean that it's not a tough influence. People's habits are ingrained over time. They're lifelong. They're built upon generations of genetics that you inherit, and the way that you're raised and the experiences you've had and where you live, and all of these things can make something like, oh, well, I want to enchant myself to eat better, can make it damn close to making it snow in July at times, depending upon what we're doing. So if we view magic as an influence, then we know we have to treat it as real sorcery, which means we have to tackle this from multiple angles. We need to, make what we're influencing with magic worthy of its influence.
It really does get back to that, looking at it in a realistic kind of way. If we want to say magic is real, then how would these things work in that sort of tangible, I want to say empirical kind of way, right? That we can measure. That's something that in our tradition, Sacred Fire, is like results matter to us, and it's kind of one of those things of like, well, why would you keep doing the same thing if you're not getting any results? And so, how can we get the most results that matter to us? Because that's the flip side of it. Is that I think this is something that will help segue into the final question, but the idea that we can use magic to just fix everything all the time, instead of looking at it as a tool to build a life where things are stable and things are okay. Like, and that was my big shocker for people. I felt was saying, hey, actually, like, we can keep doing these fast money spells. Like, I was a bartender and a server, and I was a stripper for a second when I was 19, right? Like, I get doing that work to get that quick money to do the stuff. But eventually you get to the point where you're like, no, I actually want stability. like stability and peace mean the world, right? And when you can create those things for yourself through magic, then it does two things. It says that not only is magic real and hey, everybody look at the stuff that this person's doing that is making a difference for them, but it's also helping, I think, more than anything, other magical people realize that it's worth going through some of those plateaus, and it's worth going through some of those struggles that we tend to go through as magicians. So my last question is,
I just wanted to say what you were saying before. One of the biggest dangers of magic, bigger than any demon or possession or things that people worry about. One of the biggest dangers is people can influence their world to stay in a bad status quo that is unstable. They can, if they, you can, like, ordinary people, like, man, like, as I hit my 30s, my whole, like, Gen X anti-materialist vagabonding mindset just went bye-bye. And I was like, no, I need a bed. Like, I want to fly, business class preferably, like, and it's having kids then, but you can use magic to keep yourself in a status quo because you can keep avoiding the layoff. You can keep you can enchant that lover who really isn't good for you and you're not good for them, but you can enchant them to stay for a few more months and then a few more months after that. So we can take this and just fend off all the things that make us kind of have to build more resilient lives, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So magic can actually work against us in that way. I think Don Webb was the first guy to write about that in a way that I understood it. And I was like, yeah, he's right. That's, that's 100% right. I see that in myself at the time. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing that. And I want to switch that. So thanks, Don, if you're out there.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Don. That was it's solid advice, and it's advice that I've stolen and tried to pass on because it's a big danger.
If it's good, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. My last question is about will versus intent. And this is something that I think will help kind of summarize the last 3 chapters, because you also have books about each of the topics discussed in the next 3 chapters. So, and again, it's these are exercises and things that everyone was doing and having a great time with. But the idea of willpower versus intent, and this is something that I see you address in various forms, and you really do look at it like it's in a Rubik's Cube, and you're flipping it over in these different ways, trying to get people to access this thing, because we're I think one of the magical fallacies that we've all been told is that it's all about your intention. And I think all of us know better, right? Like here. And I think this is something that comes up a lot when we have these deeper discussions about how magic works and things like that. So when it comes to this idea of sorcery, right, of having these worlds in alignment, what role does intent play, and what role does willpower play? Because those are 2 different things. So I'm going to throw it to you and ask you to define those things, but then also like the difference between those in action when we're talking about sorcery and doing things in that way that bring things into real life.
Man, willpower. I don't know if I have a good definition for them both. But intent really is important. It's just not all important. And this isn't even just a thing in magic. This is a thing in life in general. Otherwise there wouldn't be the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? The world is filled with people who have really good intentions for something, and it just goes to shit because they didn't really think it through, or they did really think it through and just unexpected things happen and people behaved in ways they did not expect. This happens all the time. This morning here in Vermont, there's it's a bad homeless crisis here in Vermont, and of course it's winter, so it's freezing. And Burlington put up pods for people that were supposed to be temporary housing for people to move into and out of. That was the intent, and it was a good intent. What happened is people moved into them, and they start, like, when people were like, okay, you got it, this isn't your home, conflicts and violence and things like that happen. So unintended consequences, right? So we should really spend some time thinking about our intent. What is it that we really want? What are we really trying to do? Are we just scared to move beyond our status quo? Because that sucks, right? Like if we're just maintaining the status quo, then we're not growing. Are we trying to do something that is like so far out of whack that it's just not really feasible, right? And sometimes people surprise me with what they're able to achieve. I've gone in and been like, hey, you might want to, you might want to think about that. And then they go ahead and they achieve it. But there are some times where people just, well, I want to make $1 million a year doing tarot card readings, and I don't want to charge more than $50 for a reading. And I'm like, you need to do some basic math, because it's not gonna, it's like there's not enough hours in the day. So you have that kind of thing, right? Like the impossible goals. So intent is really important. And I think sometimes people think about intent as like how much they want something matters. But and I'll even explain how a spell failed for something. And they'll but I really wanted it. Like I really wanted it. And I'm like, nobody gives a shit how much you wanted it. Like there was this amount of effort, there was this window of possibility, and it wasn't going to happen. How much you want it doesn't actually impact it all that much, right? Which is a tough thing for some people to hear. But that's, so intent isn't just like focusing on how much you want something. Intent is being wise and strategic and tactical and sharp about what will make your life better or what will achieve your goals. How am I going to get from A to Z? I want this. How am I going to get that? That's really where intent starts to meet reality. And I see it in every field where people lose that. The old man in me wants to point to people that, their parents gave them everything. And I know that's not everyone out there. So, but certainly when I meet people who were raised in kind of like a mom and dad will take care of it, they lose track of that idea of, well, how is this going to happen? Because for them, it's like, no, my intent is for this to happen. I'm putting it out there. Somebody else has to take care of it. So for me, intent is all about the what and the how. Willpower is about a couple things, depending on how you look at it. Willpower is about the willingness to do what is necessary. The not to be all Arnold Schwarzenegger about it, but the willingness to go through the pain period, right? To where it hurts, to build the muscle. You can't build your muscle without tearing it and letting it build. So the willingness to go through what's necessary for something to happen, that's willpower. There is also a psychic element to willpower, where there is a sheer force of will in emotion and drive behind a spell that can be as much or more of a power for it than a spirit that has been summoned. So, you know, there's that element of willpower. So yeah, it really depends on how you mean willpower. I mean, there's the thelemic idea of will, which is like your true will, right?
Yeah,
and it's supposed to
it totally does. It's so hard to talk about and to like, because it's a can, and once you open it, you're like, oh, this is like the whole turkey dinner's in this can, and you just keep going, and there's new flavors, and thank you so much for taking the time to just like come and talk about magic with us, and to talk about your book that is just like kind of sweeping like the world again. And I think this is so cool because, again, like for so long it was this hidden treasure, and now I feel like no, the world really gets to see it and gets to easily find it.
I am so happy that they are.
I am too. I am too. So where are you online and all those things? Because people they're like, oh my gosh, I'm reading somebody said this is the first time I've seen Jason Miller's face before. So like, where are people able to find you?
Strategicsorcery.net is my website. You're gonna see the blog, which gets updated every now and then. You can find me on Facebook. Follow me. I don't know that I friend that many people anymore. I'm getting close to that 5,000 number, and yeah. I just kind of stopped friending, but people follow me. But yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm technically on Instagram, and I throw things up every now and then, but when people DM me on Instagram, I almost never see it. So yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right,
man. Website is Facebook.
It's a great book. I loved the additions, the expansion, and I'm just excited that you got to be our first of all people.
I am too.
Yeah,
I'm delighted.
All right, everybody.
So much.
I will see you on Sunday for Modern Witch Living, and it's going to be fun. We have lots of mail to open, so we'll see you then. And in the meantime, hang 10, hang tight, whatever you got to do. We'll see you. I don't know. We'll see you on Sunday. We'll see you Sunday, and that's how that's going to go. So, bye, everybody.